What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, the Glucose Guesser here, and we are back with episode 150 of the video game therapy series. Yeah, if you came here hoping for a special episode 150, I am sorry to disappoint you, but not that my last ones were like stupid or they didn't, that it wasn't exactly like what I planned. I just didn't think I didn't want to make a 6-hour video and putting together a list of 150, isms. I'll do something like that again for episode 200, but if you want like a special episode, go watch episode 50 or episode 100. Because also in episode 100, I just resaid 50 of the thing, or probably like 45 out of the 50 things that I said in episode 50, and I didn't want to restate 88 of those again in this video. It didn't make any sense to me. I was just gonna blow past 150 and keep going. So that's what this is. Yeah, I was thinking about just like because I make the argument a lot about like what is what's legal is not like the legal standard shouldn't constitute the moral standard as well. Like legal and moral standards should be separate. And like I think I used the example of a pedophile or something, but to pick different examples and things, I guess I could, but in general, I think no one, everyone kind of intuitively understands that idea that there's a reason that there's legal standards for things like the whole innocent until proven guilty. Now, even the innocent until proven guilty is socially not really regarded as anything. Like, let's say if somebody, depending on how obvious this obviousness is, which I guess is subjective, but even if somebody obviously killed their wife, from a legal standard, they are an innocent person. Now, socially and inside your head, you're obviously not treating them as such if you are convinced that they murdered somebody. But regardless, there's still a legal standard that we have to assume them innocent. The reason I'm bring this up is I think we should have like, and again, we've like this standard has been enforced. So this is like, it is technically an informal standard. It's just not something that, it's something that I'm not posing to standardize, but I think it'd be funny if it were standardized. And these are just like things that aren't illegal but are socially illegal. And this is, I could turn this in more of like a joke bit, but I genuinely think there should be things that aren't, again, legally illegal, but should be illegal in the sense that like nobody should do them, or they shouldn't, like it wouldn't improve, human flourishing if this were illegal, legitimately, and not just, socially illegal. But a socially illegal thing, like let's just have an example here, like pornography as something that is socially illegal. And I've been very vocal against pornography before many times, and I will again. But regardless, as it's not, I would never advocate for it being illegal in the sense that we should put somebody in jail or arrest them or fine them or give them a misdemeanor if they were, caught whacking off to porn or something, or just caught watching it, I guess, because whacking off is not illegal. But I think making it socially illegal to the extent where if you are a porn watcher that you are shamed for that, and that is it's well known that it is a shameful activity and is not something that should be celebrated. I think the issue now is that the once informal kind of social crimes, I'll put that in quotes, the social crimes used to be enforced because people were, they lived locally with one another, and if somebody found out, heard that you were a porn watcher, you probably wouldn't hear the end of it. At work, they'd either make fun of you or they'd be like, "Oh, stay away from that guy. He's a porn watcher," or something. And they had like these, things. And it was, and maybe these things were even like, just like even if it's like rumors of somebody killing their wife, you'd still take that like local accounts and like people talking into consideration. Because as much as people want to say they can be objective, if somebody's like, "Hey, man, I think." I low-key think Jake actually murdered somebody. You'd be like, all right, you'd begin to view Jake with some skepticism, even if he like, had there was no reason for you to suspect anything before, even if you don't peg it as someone like that. There's still parts of us that are still like, well, clearly they wouldn't just like, why would they make that up for no reason, right? Unless there is some, some conspiracy trying to decredit him. I have no reason not to believe that Jake, is a murdered somebody. But either way, same with like these, again, these social crimes that are enforced. People, because they used to be subject to their locality, meaning that people they know and they would be around, they would have like a vested interest in not in maintaining social cohesion, which I think now, because all of culture and society is all disjointed, especially geographically, it's disjointed. I mean, people still live obviously in physical areas. We're not, we're not in the metaverse where everyone's in their own, not everyone's in their own Minecraft world, to put it that way. But we are. Ooh, that was a quick close lightning strike. Um, but I think we are certainly disjointed geographically, and socially we're even more so. Like geographically, 10 million people might live in New York City, but like I think the number of people talking to one another has, even within, I would even argue that, in 1960s when there was, I don't know how many, let's just suppose for hypothetical that there were 2 million people in New York City at that time. I still think there were more like face-to-face conversations happening at any given time than would be now, despite 5x number of people, or whatever that number is, living there. And that's not like a real guess. I just think my argument is that despite having more people or being around more people, we're still this is as socially isolating as we've ever been. But as a secondary result, not only like the individual problems with social isolation, but then you can't hold anybody accountable for these social crimes. So things that would be informally enforced as bad behavior, and this is just a ways that groups control their behavior. Which, again, I'm not for groups controlling behavior as a general concept, but the idea itself is still like we're still social creatures that, again, control our own behavior based off the behavior of a group. But if the group that we're in is, I guess, a global hegemon of, I guess, free market globalist or something, there's really, we have the benefit of anonymity and all of that. There's not really any benefit to, like, there's not any incentive really to being good or just being not violating these social crimes. There's no punishment for violating these social crimes. And it's almost the same as like, financial crimes, where those are almost seen as like, kind of defunct like crimes at this point, where, again, if I were dictator, whatever, I would make any financial crime, any financial like embezzling, fraud, I would make that punishable by the death penalty. And I would also kind of enforce that to, I mean, maybe this is again, there's some, I could consult my counsel on this, but I'd even make like the immediate families like criminally responsible or something like that. Like make the stakes high enough to where if anybody tries that shit, like it's over, right? Because I think now, like, Bernie Madoff is like still doing fine or something. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even. I mean, maybe this person got whacked. I don't know. But either way, like, people still commit these heinous financial crimes and then like walk around like nothing ever happened. Like they didn't just erase billions of dollars from the world, or or they just made like a simple accounting mistake. Whereas I think if you look at their actual impact, it was more akin to like a mass murder. But we don't treat these financial criminals as murderers. But in a lot of ways, I'm not saying that they're the same. There certainly is a lot of. I mean, there's even just in pulling the trigger of a gun mechanically, there's something different. Much less significant in that than there would be, again, fudging some numbers or something. But I think looking at financial crimes too softly, I think is problematic. Because it doesn't incentivize people not to do that. It's not disincentivizing the behavior. And I think if you leave this behavior, I guess, undisciplined or, super, incentivized more or less, because there's no like negative incentives for that. There's no penalty involved. Then there's no punishment for screwing up and not doing it. Where, I think like punishments, punishments and incentives being both sides of the same coin are like critical for any kind of social functioning group, right? Socially, you need some kind of social punishment as well as social reward when things go wrong or go poorly. But now, because our social validation happens digitally and can be spoofed, and is also they're scalable, I think it is less potent, but at the same time you can also get whatever feedback you are looking for, from your quote unquote social outlet, which would be social media or whatever. So you'll have, no matter what, you'll have somebody telling you that you're the smartest person ever and that you're a genius or whatever, or somebody sucking you off somewhere. So it's like your actions are moderately defensible since somebody agrees with you. But in reality, like if you were a small town snake oil salesman, like yeah, they would arrest you and they'd throw you, or they just kick you out of the town. They would yeet you away, and they would remember and they'd know this guy's a fraudster. And then you have to go to the next town and do your same scheme. But at the very least, it was still like blue collar scam work. Whereas the scam work now is all this white collar stuff. It's like people you'll never see, or calling you and calling your grandparents, trying to remove. Like whereas it used to be, you had to like push around the snake oil cart, and you had to make the pitch to people, and you had to sell the snake oil one vial at a time. Metaphorically or figuratively at least, or literally in this case. I mean, I'm sure that I'm sure there was a literal snake oil salesman at some point, before the trope kind of came along, and it all took all different forms. I mean, even like weird groups and things that are recruiting people like Mensa and stuff are again all borderline snake oil salesman shit. But you still like you were still attached with that. But I think now like, and I'm not blaming the anonymity of the internet. I think the internet is largely it's not a it's I'd say it's a largely misunderstood technology, but I don't even think it's misunderstood. I think it's just misused, right? It's kind of an abused technology and not one that I think is I don't know. I'm not gonna say it's not used properly because it's not like I have an alternative way of setting it up. But I think in hindsight, and I think most developers or software architects or people would agree that and think there perhaps were maybe in hindsight some better ways of setting everything up. I guess one way that it still baffles me is like the and this is not I guess this is maybe I don't know how common the sentiment is, but I think the desktop like computer user experience, like the user interface from like the early days of Microsoft Windows, where it's again kind of this canvas with there's icons that are little squares, and you click on the icons and the window opens and then something is there. Like that as a paradigm of like the visual paradigm of computing, I think is fine, but wasn't that kind of iteration zero? Like, did we not have any? And I mean, yeah, there's other like ways of imagining a computer. So like there's user interfaces like Figma or Kdenlive Live or Shotcut or DaVinci Resolve. Like those are obviously UIs for a different tool, but are there really no alternative ways of structuring like a desktop? Now, there's obviously like command line desktops, and like ones that don't even have a user interface, which is the kind that I use. But even like beyond that, I'm even thinking like I don't know if you guys ever made these when you were in school, but I guess it would age yourself if you did. But like there's these prezzies where they used to like zoom in and zoom out on things, and I always thought that was an interesting way to go about a desktop. So you'd almost have little localized clusters of applications, files, and folders that are open or active, and they're organized spatially on your desktop. So like you go to so let's say like the top right of my computer is Minecraft related things, and when I go there or like when I navigate maybe like my home screen is like the zoomed out version, and then like I have different corners or different parts of the canvas on which I can operate. And maybe maybe it's a free canvas, I can just draw stuff on there, or I can write little notes take care of later. But then each kind of spatial part of the screen has a cluster of related things. So these are related files. Maybe it's a browser tab, maybe it's an application of some kind. Like they're all kind of grouped there. They're grouped by I guess grouped by function versus grouped by nothing's even grouped now. Now it's just you have a big wall of applications you can pick from, and most of everything's done in the browser. Trying to throw everything in the browser, but I think just as a like different ways to interact with a Turing machine, even beyond like a regular computer. Are there really? Have we not imagined any other ways of interact? I mean, I just came up with one kind of randomly, but I think if I sat down for a couple weeks, I could think of many different alternate computing schemes. And part of this is just we're so used to it, we don't bother to like I don't know, make anything new or reinvent the wheel. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I would argue that in some ways it is kind of I don't know, is somewhat broke. At least it doesn't seem. I mean, I don't know. Maybe people like the UI of their computer, but I think I also don't think it's. I don't think it's not broke. I think people haven't. They haven't even considered that they could like something else much more, than just an icon and like the same windows and the same clicking and keyboard. Because I even like as a Vim user too, you think about this a lot, where it's like, okay, I don't need a mouse anymore. I can just navigate using Vim. But it's like, okay, if everything's these key binding based, like why not turn that into like a whole paradigm of interacting with the computer is using keybinds, instead of like the primarily GUI interface. Because I'm even thinking about what human computer interactions could be fastest. And I mentioned last time at the very end like how stupid these vocal interfaces were, because again I think it's a very slow, lossy, inarticulate medium because people don't talk that fast. They can type faster than they can talk. If it was like a brain to computer thing, you can certainly think faster and you can type, but we can't we can't remove cogent thoughts from people, so that's really not going to work. Then it's like, okay, well we can because we can type and use our fingers faster than our brain to finger connection is faster than like our vocal cords to air to then like transcription, that pipeline. So then it might make more sense to like focus on the hands and what can the hands do with the computer. And that's okay. All right, we have these keyboards here, which is essentially a big grid of buttons. That's one way to go about it. And there's a mouse with, that you kind of drag around. But I've even imagined like, what if you could put your hands into something like the whole, was it Minority Report where he's like, it looks like he's mounting a Tron bicycle or something, but he's putting his hands into this thing and massaging the air. But like as silly and as goofy as that was, and is, I mean, not what it is, silly and goofy. It's at least an interesting, different paradigm. Like, really, there's not a single like, why are aviators, financialists, and why are all people using the exact same user interface? Like regardless of any kind of career, venture capital, isn't like they all use the same gay ass little Windows interface to like click on icons and open buttons and stuff. Really, like I think in terms of optimization, you think you'd have at least a few different paradigms for different types of computer users. Now, one could argue that like Linux users are their own breed of, maybe they're programmers or techies or whatever, but they have all taken it into their own hands and have this, hyper libertarian. I'm going to roll my own thing, which I get. That's what I did. I'm literally, I literally riced my own, Hyperland distro, but it's still largely like, mine is mostly key bindings based. I don't have any icons, and my home is just empty workspaces and screens. So it's a slight deviation from kind of your standard, your standard point and click, thing. But I still use all the same things. I'm even thinking like from a research perspective, like inventing new, human computer devices. And I know that there are ones out there, stupid ones that try to read your thoughts that don't work. But even like different, I even think different keyboards would be interesting to experiment with those. But it doesn't seem like people are even like, they just kind of assume that computers are the way they are and they'll be the way they are going to be, and there really isn't anything you can do about it. And it seems, I don't know, it doesn't seem very agenic to people just to kind of lie down and take their desktop UX, as it is. The phone UX being buttons and things, I actually have less of a problem with the whole touch centricity of phones. But I do think there's just so much more to do on like the desktop computing device. Because I'd even argue that the phone as a computer serves a separate purpose. I mean, it's kind of trivial, but desktop laptops I think are similar in cluster, where they're productivity devices gained at using the computer to its full capacity. Whereas the phone is less of like, I want to squeeze all the the performance out of this phone. It's like, then don't get a phone, you idiot. That's like it's a portable device. It's meant for being on you all the time, long battery life. Maybe like it doubles a camera or something. But if you're going to do real computing and you actually are working with large number, like if you're doing anything serious, put the fucking iPad or phone down. Like, are you genuinely calling yourself a programmer with an iPad? Like, that's not. And I'm sure maybe you can make a Scratch app or something stupid, but you're not. That's not like you're not going to get the most out of. It's an inefficient workflow. The desktop laptop workflow is much better, but and there are people that have kind of not research, but have at least invested into productivity. But I'm even thinking like research into new paradigms of interacting with the computing. And there's also an interesting kind of not theory, but a secondary architecture to computing where it's all like units themselves. There's an interesting project. The project is called Pocket. I think it's a defunct project at this point. They haven't updated it in years, but it was almost like this. I don't know how to call it, but it's like almost like a web or network of computing where it's like you can, imagine you have two computers side by side that, essentially to the layman function as one computer. Could you add a third computer and the other two computers use that compute without having to like any additional configuration? A human doesn't have to go in and SSH in and combine. It's like the system itself is intelligent enough to realize, and these are rules that you'd have to program into the first two computers, but the system's intelligent enough to realize, okay, there's more compute available. We can now divvy up our work amongst the three computers. And then like even like from a sensory, a touch perspective thing where it's like maybe one computer gets, and these could be tiny computers. I think the Pocket example I mentioned, the computer, I mean, it was like a scalable or tileable computing thing. And it was puny. It was like, a few inches across. But with each additional like, little processor chip that you can just drop on, and these aren't chips like, in a fab lab semiconductor. These are just like little blocks, almost like Legos you could put together. And that was that tech demo. But I just mean in general, like thinking of computers of some kind of web we could build around things and them being an interconnected network. Because now it's all like, it's API based, like endpoint based. That's all the internet is, all endpoint based. It's like I'm the client and the server. It's all this client server architecture, which is, again, as I'm not insulting as a paradigm. I'm just asking, is that really the only architecture we've ever had and will have? Like, is there no, and maybe like if you're actually watching this and you are familiar with some like like completely, unique or otherwise, unmentioned forms of computing, I'm totally all ears. It's just, we only seem to get the same crappy, like, oh, we got the icons on the bottom. Actually, we move the icons to the right. That way, this is like the Windows. Windows is gonna come back in a whole new way. It's like, it's been the same fucking 10 buttons and broken programs for 50 years. You haven't done anything. There's no innovation. How could you even use it? That word is an insult. I mean, even like, it's almost getting to the point where now, like, even like the word like science is insulting to me almost, because I know what somebody means when they say, well, I trust the science. And I have to remind them, science is not a person. Science is a framework, a methodology, or asymptotically getting closer to a theory that we have that might resemble something called the truth. But the difference is, truth itself is kind of a difficult concept to conceptually grasp, as well as articulate in a meaningful way, or just prove. How can you prove anything is true, right? Like, even like a simple logical statement, like I don't know, Jesse is taller than Bill, and then asking the question, and then making the statement, Jesse is taller than Bill. Like, is this true? It's like, well, I suppose, like, okay, then we have to kind of go into each word. Like, yes, from my conception of the words tall and my conception of taller than, and the words assembled in this manner, it leads me to believe that, Jess or John is taller than Jess, or whatever the fuck I said. I don't even remember. But regardless, like, you could still boil down into each. Maybe this is a bad example, but you could go down into each word and determine, like, okay, taller, that's like we're talking about a length measure. So his length measure and tallness would describe the length measure, and you could go into excruciating detail with this. But again, I don't ever think you'd arrive at essentially a question of, like, what does this word mean? And it's like, well, I think it means this. And okay, well, Webster believes it means this. It's like, all right, well, then is Webster kind of we're just going to go with Webster? Like, how are we able to agree on this? Like, I think in order for something to be true, everyone has to agree on it. And I think if you are disagreeable enough, nothing can be true, technically. Like, you could, state something as such that, where nothing would be true. Hang on. All right, but I'm gonna move on to something else. Yeah, I guess I just had something in mind I was gonna move to, but then I forgot. Yeah, I don't know. Let me think here. Let me just go to my list here. Oh yeah, this is what I was thinking about. So I was posed this interesting. I guess I didn't really. I guess I just learned this recently, but there's this Socrates kind of spoke about this a little bit at some point. I guess I say it isn't right because he never wrote anything down, but he spoke about this at some point. But like and it's not really necessarily about it is. It's not necessarily about computers, but it can be applied to computers. So he was worried. Like, this is part of the reason why I never wrote anything down, was because he was worried when you distill wisdom down into its words, no one would be there to speak the wisdom. So therefore, like, the wisdom wouldn't necessarily be felt or be known by somebody, right? So it's like, if a wise man shares something, but that thing is written down and not shared by the wise man itself, like, who's to know either if that is a wisdom and whose wisdom is that, or where it came from? And it was less to do with the source, but more of just like the falsity of that of the truth, or that wisdom. I mean, and I think we're kind of facing a similar, I suppose, dilemma with this, and it's obviously not. I think we can say now that writing hasn't lost. Maybe writing does lose the wisdom whatever you're sharing, but I can say now that writing didn't really destroy that. But I think having an alternative, having a computer that could, again, if I'm kind of assuming that the boosters that think that you can, put a brain into a computer, that our brain architecture is somehow replicable using, again, von Neumann computer architecture, I think is silly. But regardless, like, suppose we were able to have some device or something that we could say is my brain and has everything to do with me, or even that like it isn't me, but it is capable of doing anything that I could do, right? It could, any movie I would write or any essay or like it could do any of that for me immediately, like the whole point of like doing like people I think like miss this point where it's like they're like, oh, like imagine how hard it is to write a Hollywood screenplay, but now it's easy. Now you can just plug it. It's like I think the point of doing it sometimes is because it is hard, and especially like art. I'm not saying that art needs to be hard. Like art can be like a relaxing kind of leisure activity, but I think there's certain people that really do take art as like a form of work, and I would and I would put myself in that category where I do think like art as a like art needs to be taken serious. I think society or politics should be taken less serious. Art should be taken more seriously. In the sense, not in the sense you should look at every piece and like think about the implications or like why it's important. And again, we've kind of detached. We've associated so much of art with politics, and maybe this is just my own poisoning of it from my schooling, but I feel like anytime there was a work of art that was discussed, it was always like, well, here's how it led to the French Revolution. It's like, is there any, like, what about the really good painting of a boat or something, like, can't that be like what art, like this person made a really, really good painting, or like, I'm just more impressed and more drawn to art that is either highly like skilled and technical or was like highly laborious. Like if somebody weaved together 400 separate little silkworms to make a blanket or something. I mean, again, I don't even know. I'm just making this up. To me, like that effort is like, wow, this is like pretty cool. It's like an impressive feat, to do. Whereas if someone like someone AI generating something, or even just art that is like, well, this art led to the revolution of whatever. It's like this art, the political ramifications of this art aren't as important to me. It's more about like the nature in which this was created. Because again, I've defined art as like the artist is on a journey of some kind, and the audience is just on that journey with them, and the medium is just simply how the artist has decided to share what their journey is. So if it's a photographer, they're sharing their journey of life through pictures, and I think these the works of art inherently are selfish, and this may be a different point in general. I think art should be and is a selfish endeavor, which I will now attempt to defend. I've made the claim. Now I'm going to attempt to defend it. So I think the best art, and this not even art. Art can be extrapolated. The best creations of any kind, even like if you refer to like Nietzsche's essays as art. The best art, the best creations, the best works of any kind, you can call creative, or you can call just works in general, are highly honest with oneself. I think, again, I've mentioned Nietzsche before about this, and he's kind of known as this, but he's known as being like, not the most honest philosopher, but he could be up there in the sense that he was so honest with himself that he, his truths and his writings that he revealed aren't things that are, or even articulations that would be foreign to people. I think people like inherently get what he's saying, and that's why he's like, he's not obscure. People understand what he's saying and they agree with him. But it's because he was so honest with himself. He reached that level of depth within himself to then find these like almost universal truths that people don't deny. And I think art, the best art, is one that reaches so deep into oneself. You find a universally human experience, or a universally human, maybe it's an individual experience or a type of experience or a class of experience, but it is highly, highly, highly individual. But it is a something that can extrapolate, or every human kind of intuitively gets, right? They kind of understand that. So, I mean, I don't know, like, as silly as like, okay, it's a photograph of a toilet. Okay, now again, I'm trying to defend this. The toilet, in many ways, again, depending on how maybe let's say it's a very, very well drawn picture of a toilet, so I can use that angle. I can appreciate the and almost this is maybe a work of art in some way. It could be, if somebody did this, they drew a very beautiful picture of a toilet, but it's the revelation could be it's the mundane that really makes our lives. It's like, imagine the time that you've spent on this toilet, and like the meals that this toilet represents, right? The kind of this idle time that the toilet represents. Everyone has used a toilet, in the modern world. Everyone's familiar with this. But to each person, the toilet might represent something wholly different, and be, to some people might not be that significant. It's just like, well, it's a toilet. Other people, it's like, well, wow, it's like that is kind of where, maybe my most intimate moments are. So, taking a I don't even, again, I don't know. I'm using a horrible example here, but you can get what I'm saying. Whereas people see themselves in the image of the toilet, they, they kind of, in one way or another, however strange it is, kind of relate to the toilet in a human way. But the drawing of the toilet itself was motivated entirely. It wasn't by, again, maybe he could have had the idea that other people would relate to the toilet, but I think the best picture would be one that was his toilet, right? It's like not a generic toilet or not like any toilet. It's his toilet, and he was, that is what's important. And again, I don't know why the toilet would be so important to him, or why he would have reached so deep down into like discover the truths about humanity through the toilet. But again, that's what art is. It's just this kind of exploration. Um, so but I do think in that, in order to reach down into yourself to find these like universally human truths, you have to be, at least in some way selfish in terms of listening to your own instincts. So, a selfish act is one that you're not, you're only thinking about yourself. And when you're creating art in this case, I think you kind of do need to only be thinking about yourself, but not yourself in the sense of like what benefits you, but who you are, right? Or I think selfishness is, this is going to benefit me financially or other. Whereas art, you can think selfishly, but only just about your experiences, not what your benefit is. Not like, well, so many people are going to see this picture of the toilet and they're going to think, wow, what a talented artist. I want to pay him for this toilet. It's like, no, you can't. You have to think about the subject itself and like what this, metaphysical or philosophical or social or whatever important cause that you're reaching down is an important part of you. You have to be thinking about you to do that. You can't be thinking about, what other people will think, or, if you do, you can still make something. I'm not saying you can't keep other people in mind, but it won't be good. It's not going to be, I don't think it'll be world class. Like, you're not going to make the Mona Lisa thinking about, the return on investment, or, if your mom is going to be proud of you for, it's like, you can't think about that if you're making a masterpiece. And some people, again, artists don't like bully. You can't think you're making a masterpiece. You can't, but I think that's where you need to be taking it serious. I think it's like you should embark on something trying to do the absolute best that you can, knowing that you won't and you'll fall short and you'll want to do better, but not accepting that, right? You don't accept the fact that it's not perfect. You try for perfection, but then accept the reality. But I think if you strive for perfection and you hold yourself to that standard too tightly, you don't end up making anything. So as long, you have to be making something. But either way, that's more of a interpersonal problem than it is the artist problem. But in general, I think art is kind of a selfish endeavor, and needs to be so. I'm not even bashing that. I think if you want to be a good artist, you have to be somewhat selfish. Selfish in terms of what you're thinking about. You're not thinking about how it benefits you, but only you and your experience. And then what from your experience do you want to put into what medium? So what medium do you like? Do you want videos? Is it a photo? Is it a drawing of a toilet? Whatever. What medium is that, and why is it that you in this medium with this subject make the best? Like, why does it make sense, right? Like me making art about Minecraft or fucking philosophy, that would make sense. It tracks at least with what you've seen. But like if I were to come out and talk about how great the Apple stock is. I mean, I don't even know how you can make art about the Apple stock, but I'm sure somebody a colorful or an LED stock ticker or something like that. I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'll move on to something else. Yeah, let's see here. Yeah, I suppose with that too, like the other way to look at these texts, I guess I was talking about Socrates and the whole like need for, if you have something or a machine that can produce the exact output of his, brain or his, thinking, why would you even need him in the first place? So it's kind of anyone that thinks that like, well, the capabilities would be so much more and it's going to enable humanity. I don't think it's enabling humanity to do anything better than it is. Even like, suppose there's an argument like somebody says, well, instead of months and months and work rewriting scripts and talking to people arguing about the script, maybe you all come together, or the director just throws the script in ChatGPT, boom, full movie script done, perfect. And while that sounds great, that's obviously no one that's ever done anything or ever like actually produced a movie or produced a movie that's worth watching. Maybe they have made a movie with AI, but it's not worth watching. Any art that is worth being created in the first place, or even being worth thinking about, I think has to come from a deeply selfish, embedded human understanding or a human revelation or a human experience, not I think the hours and months that it takes to generate something is the product itself. It's not the output. I think people look at the output and go, well, we can get from here to there much faster. It's like, I think you're missing the point. The point isn't to get from here to there. The point isn't to get that, right? The output is not what the goal is, right? The goal is that process, the artistic process. And that's the goal both for the artist and in many ways for the audience, right? I think the audience kind of, we skip over this because we just think about the movie or, the actors or whatever we see on screen, whether it be a movie or a book or anything else. It's, vice versa, or, just replace them in. We only see that front end, so it's easier for an audience person to just go, well, it's just a script, just punch in the script and do it, But I think we lose so much of what's meaningful about any decent piece of work in doing that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm constantly insulted by anyone that I don't know, doesn't see the problem or hypocrisy in like a computer, enabling humanity to like, oh, people don't like the boring parts of the art. It's like that's the part that's the important part. Like you get good at stuff when it sucks and you don't want to do it, or that you have to do it, or there's not, doing it the inefficient way is the way to do it. They're even I forget who was this, but somebody, I think it was Hunter S. Thompson, wanted to get better at writing, and he wanted to write like Churchill or something. I don't know, there's some writer he wanted to write like, or Hemingway, I think is who it was. It wasn't Churchill. I don't know why I even thought that. But, his strategy was to literally type what, Hemingway or whoever it was, type out or not type out, but write out what he wrote. So he would Hunter S. Thompson read, a book or something, and then he would write the book again, what he's writing down. He's writing because he wanted to practice writing, what he thought was good writing. While most people were like silly, like why would you, you just read the book, you already have the text, why are you putting it out again? The point was the process. Like he thinks, and I would agree that you become a better writer by, writing well and I think what easier way to do that than to literally write somebody who is, he did think wrote well, like Hemingway. But again, the point isn't to produce, works, or Hemingway to have finished books, or just have, stock number go up. But the point is that artistic process that you would lose by doing all these shortcuts that, again, sound great and sound very enabling to people. But I think people don't need to be enabled anymore. Like people don't need to be enabled by AI or AI enabled to, they need to do the dishes, right? They need to do laundry. They need to wake up early. I mean, that's not what people need. People don't need more AI capabilities. They need to do the basics. They need hygiene, diet, exercise. I mean, these are what's really faltering. It's not like the lack of an individual person, is unable to make a full movie script in 20 minutes, from a web browser. That's not the problem that we're having. People aren't taking care of themselves, and they're not, and other people are, I guess pushing these fake lies to people that is what they're missing, and people believe them. But whatever, it's beside the point. Move on to something else here for the remainder of this episode. This was an interesting theory. Again, another theory around consciousness, only because it's kind of what I spend most of my time rambling about. But it was this idea that consciousness and I'll say like intelligence sum to one. Now it's obviously, okay, what do those terms mean if you're gonna phrase it like that? But I think it just kind of postulates an inverse relationship between the amount that you're aware and the your intelligence. And that isn't to say that unconscious things are like supremely intelligent in terms of like a 1.0, because I guess that's what that would imply if consciousness was zero, intelligence was there. But there is something to be said like as some amount of trade-off where after a certain point your like self-awareness loop begins to like no longer be not an intelligent thing, but no longer result in intelligent actions, which you could call just a faltering of intelligence. But it's interesting. It's like the other way to look at that is however deeply you experience the world is inversely related to how well you navigate it. So how well you navigate it, I'm defining as intelligence. Like an intelligent agent is one that navigates their environment, intelligently, and it results in, I guess, positive outcomes in whatever way. That would be intelligence. Whereas, however deeply you experience life, which would be the experience of life, would be consciousness, would be heightened. So in this example, if you have like Down syndrome or something with a 50 IQ, you experience the world maybe we'll say twice as deep as someone with 100 IQ. And again, we're using the IQ as a loose proxy. I understand it's not even a remotely roughly accurate measure of intelligence itself, but you know, for lack of a better alternative, that's what I'll say. Whereas people that might have IQs in the 200s don't really experience life that deeply, only because they're too far into their own hubris, right? Their own kind of analytical head. They're not experiencing the world. Because again, like I've said this in the last 3 episodes, but like planning and thinking about what you're gonna do next is the opposite of doing anything. Like that is by definition doing nothing. Thinking about what you're gonna do, or writing down what you're gonna do, even isn't doing anything, and will never be doing anything. It's maybe it's not even. I wouldn't even say it's the first step. It's before the first step. It's like step -1, right? But you can't. You have to take step 0 or step 1, meaning start doing the actual thing that you're talking about or speaking about or even writing about. But like planning it is not doing it. Doing it is doing it. Um, and maybe that's the hard distinction, is like, what is the plan? When does the plan end and execution begin? But that's a different a different question. Either way, it is interesting to think of it that way. Where so in the same vein, like if we're going to say that dogs are less conscious than humans, maybe they're not unconscious. I don't think anyone's saying that, but I think there's good arguments to be made that they're less conscious than humans, meaning they don't quite feel the same depth or the same breadth of emotion too. Maybe so just like the wide range of emotions that humans would feel, maybe dogs would feel some fraction of that. I'm not saying that it is the case. I'm just saying that's what this theory alleges. But I think that is interesting that they would experience the world more deeply. But the issue with that is, like, as an intelligent being, or the more intelligent beings, it's impossible to, because we only ever have one data point of intelligence. I can't ever compare how aware or conscious or intelligent somebody else is. Like, I genuinely don't know. Like, it is possible in theory. Of course, this is all speculative. It's obviously not likely or true, but it's possible. Like, because I have no other subjective experiences, like the only subjective experience I have is my own, it's possible that I live life and have feelings and emotions that are entirely different from the way everybody else feels. Like, it could be completely foreign. Like, my concept or my feeling of fear, or my concept of happiness, or satisfaction, or whatever, could be completely foreign to what other people feel, or what the average person feels. Or maybe you're the non-average and I'm the average, right? Or whatever it is, or even average or median, or just like what the actual human experience is. But because I have no other, I mean, I could be the dumbest person in the world and just not know, or the smartest and I wouldn't know either, because I can't, like, without getting in the mind of somebody else, there's no way of comparing. Even if I could, I have there's no metric or set of metrics that I can subject my brain to that'll tell me exactly how conscious I am. And I mean, again, how intelligent I am is also, I would also put in that category, but that's a more arguable yes. But like, there's no consciousness detecting machine that I can tell you, well, the dog is more conscious than us. These are all intuit based, like, assumptions about things. So it's like, we obviously assume that we are conscious because we invented the word consciousness and we defined it. And each of us have our own subjective experience that collectively is enough for us to agree, again, collectively, that consciousness is a real concept and is not something fake. But that same way, like earlier, I was talking about the skeptic that if they denied everything, if you denied that consciousness was a real concept and it was instead, again, something illusory, then again, this entire conversation would be meaningless. And in some ways easier in that way, because at least it's like you're, I guess, dying on the same intellectual horse that you're trying to ride on. So it's not like you're saying something different. You're kind of being an absolutist in that sense. Which I guess this brings you to a completely separate topic, but and I've fallen victim to this myself. I'm just kind of, maybe I'm still now trying to reel myself out of this. I'll say just like this existential hole that I've didn't dig myself, but certainly puttering around in for a while. I think existentialism, or just a philosophy of, and maybe this extends directly into a nihilist philosophy, but I'll say existentialist to be more, I guess, all encompassing. But I think it does really well at quelling anxieties of people. So if you are, if you are an anxious person, but if you're in a time of anxiety in your life, or you are under a lot of pressure, or there's just, regardless, you're just unsure about. You're not really confident in either yourself or the future or whatever. I think existentialism and Stoicism to a lesser extent, but still because of its, not nihilist roots, but because of its, they're maybe sisters. Maybe Stoicism and nihilism are, they have some similarities. In terms of, one's more of a wisdom religion kind of thing or a set of values. The other one's more of just a philosophy about the world. But I think while existentialism or nihilism and stoicism to a lesser extent are very comforting, I don't think they're very productive. Now, stoicism I think is the most productive of those, but existentialism and nihilism especially I think are very counterproductive like modes of thinking. And because it's very vindicating, meaning that like, well, logically as anyone could be, I'm as right as anyone could be. Because again, scientifically or like empirically, there really isn't any evidence towards anything, any particular existence of a god or anything. There's no, again, using the best information we have available, it is most prudent and likely to say that it is true. Nothing in life matters. There is no meaning. But that's only because we haven't, I'm not gonna say we haven't discovered that yet, but science hasn't quote unquote invented that yet, which is a whole different discussion on science kind of inventing things versus discovering them, and like to what degree human subjectivity plays into that. Which, again, spoiler a lot. But regardless, it still is like the most accurate answer we could give is that of the existentialist or the nihilist. But while it might be accurate, it is unhelpful, and especially most unhelpful to the person parading around that philosophy. Because, like, saying nothing matters does kind of vindicate you of responsibility, or that, the good and bad things that you've done are meaningless. But that also kind of assigns meaninglessness in advance to good and bad things that you may or may not do. And because it kind of immediately assigns, like, I'll say, like, meaninglessness, or essentially, a neutral, I'm not going to say negative, but a neutral result of any action, you're not incentivized to do anything, right? You're just kind of incentivized not to act, only because that nothing in life truly matters. Whereas like in order to make something matter, it requires effort to make anything matter in life. Things don't just boom, they are meaningful all of a sudden, right? It's even like something as meaningful as a family can be meaningless. If you're a true nihilist, you're like, well, family's meaningless, it means nothing. But a family can also be meaningful. It's simply a matter of what you choose to decide is meaningful. And I think people don't realize that is a choice and is not something given to them. You can choose what you want to make meaningful. Now, you can make all the wrong things meaningful. I'm not saying that, but you still have autonomy in doing that. Like if you think the most meaningful thing for you in the world is to obliterate your political enemies or something, okay, fine. But you're allowed to create that meaning. Which I think is actually more of an existentialist, a cosmic existentialist philosophy, and is less nihilistic. I guess maybe I'll give points back to existentialism there, because it does that. In thinking about it more, it is more like that. But I do think that the anxiety reduction of a nihilist and nothing matters is not a constructive worldview, because you simply won't do things because you view them as inherently neutral. And it is, again, I'm not even going to go so far as to say it's inherently negative. I don't think it is nihilism's a death cult. I think just people don't really realize that while you might feel like you're right and that there's nothing that you could prove you wrong, which is true, there is nothing that can prove you wrong, but there's also nothing that can prove you right either. So it's inherently this kind of neutral, almost like a purgatory of philosophies. Maybe that's a good way of saying what nihilism is. It is the purgatory for philosophies. You're never going to go anywhere meaningful being a nihilist. Like you won't. And people would say that like Nietzsche was not. He was not. He was a Christian for all. Either way, look up on the history if you're actually curious. But I think nihilism is the purgatory of philosophies, and is not something that not something that you should strive for. You shouldn't want to be a nihilist. And if you are, you find yourself, embracing nihilist tendencies, a lot of times it's only because maybe things aren't going the way you want. And I would encourage you to be an agent in those times and not a passive. Because people even think about the way people phrase things. It's like, does life happen to you, or does life give you chances, or do you take the chances? Right? It's like, do you take chances, or does life give you those? And I tend to, I ping pong back and forth on this. I do feel like agency is very important in people, but I do also think that the not the spirituality, but just the dimension of the humility of accepting powers beyond our control is also important. So I think life happening to you can be a perfectly healthy, normal abstraction on, unlucky and unfortunate events. But I also think that, you shouldn't have agency in saying, well, I got cancer because I gave it to myself. It's like, all right, you can chalk cancer up to bad luck. That's, no one's going to fault you for that. But I think if chalk up everything to luck, the good and the bad, uh, or everything then just becomes neutral, and a neutral worldview, or just neutral thing they don't really incite any kind of action. So I think if you are seeing yourself down the nihilist path, get ready for the least productive period of your life, because you're not going to do anything because nothing matters, right? So like, what's the incentive to do anything if nothing matters? That's why I think it is kind of it's a very dangerous view in that sense, because of its like supreme neutrality. And people tend to view neutrality as always a good thing. I think neutrality is obviously a very important attribute to have, but I think when it comes to like who you are and what you value, values cannot be neutral. You can't have neutral opinions about or neutral value. You need strong values that you believe in, whether or not they're they're seen as right or wrong. Like, you have to believe they're right, and you have to make, like, there's a certain conviction that you have to have, that I don't think nihilism even allows for any kind of conviction. Or you have to be kind of unsure about everything, and or at least certain that nothingness is the only answer to everything. Is that you're certain of uncertainty, which is, again, paradoxical and silly. But either way, stop being nihilist. Go brush your teeth and take a shower. Whatever. Take care of yourself. Peace out.